It started as just another Tuesday night on The Tonight Show, until Jimmy Fallon heard 4 words that changed everything. The studio lights dimmed, the audience fell silent, and what happened next wasn't comedy anymore. It was something sacred. The Tonight Show studio buzzed with its usual pre-show energy. Camera operators adjusted their angles. The Roots tuned their instruments, and audience members settled into their seats with anticipation. Jimmy Fallon, in his signature navy suit, paced behind his desk, reviewing his notes one final time. Tonight's guest was Leanne Morgan, the Southern comedian whose warm storytelling had captured America's heart. Leanne sat in the green room, her blonde hair perfectly styled, wearing a burgundy dress that complemented her infectious smile. She'd been touring comedy clubs for decades, but The Tonight Show still felt surreal. Her phone buzzed with messages from her hometown in Tennessee. Half the town was throwing watch parties. 5 minutes to tape, a production assistant announced. Jimmy walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. The familiar rhythm began, monologue jokes, audience interaction, the Roots playing him into commercial breaks. Everything was perfectly orchestrated, until Leanne walked out, and something in her eyes told Jimmy this wasn't going to be an ordinary interview. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the hilarious Leanne Morgan," Jimmy announced, his smile genuine as always. Leanne waved to the crowd, her southern charm immediately filling the studio. She settled into the guest chair, crossing her legs and adjusting her dress with practiced ease. "Leanne, welcome to the show. You've been selling out venues across the country. How does it feel to have America falling in love with your stories?" "Well, Jimmy," Leanne drawled, her Tennessee accent wrapping around each word like honey, "I keep thinking somebody's gonna figure out I'm just a mom from a small town talking about my life and the jig will be up." The audience laughed, but Jimmy noticed something flickering behind her smile, a depth that suggested tonight's conversation might venture into unexpected territory. "Speaking of small towns, you've talked about how your community shaped your comedy. Tell us about that." Leanne's expression softened. "Oh, honey, small town people are comedy gold. We take care of each other in ways that might seem odd to city folks, like we'll bring you a casserole if you're sick, but we'll also talk about your business at the grocery store." The audience chuckled, but Leanne continued, her voice taking on a different quality. "But you know what's not funny? When someone in your community is hurting, really hurting, and laughter becomes the only medicine you can offer." Jimmy's smile faltered slightly. Something in her tone had shifted the energy in the room. "There was this woman in my town," Leanne said, her hands fidgeting with her bracelet. "Miss Dorothy. She lived 2 streets over from me. 83 years old. Sweetest thing you ever saw. Made the best cornbread in 3 counties. The studio was quieter now. Even the Roots had stopped their background noodling. Miss Dorothy got sick. Real sick. The kind where the doctors start using words like comfortable and time." Leanne paused, looking down at her hands. "Her daughter called me one day crying. Said Miss Dorothy hadn't smiled in weeks. Wouldn't eat. Wouldn't talk. Just fading away." Jimmy leaned forward, his host instincts telling him to steer toward lighter territory, but something deeper kept him silent. "So I went over there," Leanne continued. "Knocked on her door with my guitar and my biggest smile. Her daughter answered, looking like she hadn't slept in days. I said, 'Honey, I'm here to do a one-woman show for an audience of 1. A few scattered chuckles came from the audience, but they felt different now, softer, more reverent. I set up right there in Miss Dorothy's living room, told her every funny story I could think of, sang silly songs, did impressions of everyone in town. Leanne's voice began to crack. For 3 hours I performed like my life depended on it." Jimmy's throat tightened. He could see where this was heading, and it was breaking something inside him. "And you know what happened?" Leanne looked directly at Jimmy, tears beginning to pool in her eyes. She laughed. This beautiful, full-belly laugh. Her daughter started crying right there in the doorway. Miss Dorothy reached up, took my hand, and said 4 words that changed everything. The studio was completely silent now, 300 people holding their breath. She said, "You are my prayer." Jimmy's face crumpled. The professional mask he'd worn for thousands of shows simply dissolved. He pushed back from his desk, stood up, and walked around to where Leanne sat. The cameras kept rolling, but this wasn't television anymore. This was two human beings sharing something sacred. "Leanne," Jimmy said, his voice barely above a whisper. "How long did you have with her after that?" "3 more days," she whispered back. "I went back every day, told her stories, sang her songs. Her daughter said it was the most peaceful she'd been since getting sick." Jimmy knelt beside Leanne's chair. The audience watched in stunned silence as America's favorite late-night host abandoned every protocol, every script, every professional boundary. "You know what you did?" Jimmy said, his voice thick with emotion. "You didn't just tell jokes. You became hope. You became love." Leanne nodded, tears streaming down her face. "That's when I understood what comedy really is. Jimmy, it's not about being funny. It's about being human. It's about showing up when someone needs to remember that joy still exists." Jimmy stood slowly, faced the audience, and did something unprecedented. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying across the silent studio, "I want everyone to stand up." The audience rose as one. Miss Dorothy from Tennessee, a woman most of us never met, taught us something tonight through Leanne's story. She taught us that laughter isn't just entertainment. It's medicine. It's prayer. It's love made audible. He turned back to Leanne. "And Lan, you weren't just a comedian that day. You were an angel. You were exactly what Miss Dorothy needed, exactly when she needed it." The applause that followed wasn't typical television applause. It was reverent, grateful, the kind of applause that recognizes something sacred. But Jimmy wasn't finished. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small card. "This is my personal card," he said to Leanne. "Not because you're a guest, but because the world needs more people like you. People who understand that showing up matters, that being present for someone's pain is the most important performance any of us will ever give." Leanne took the card with trembling hands. "Jimmy, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," he interrupted gently. "Because Miss Dorothy was right. When we use our gifts to heal others, when we show up in someone's darkest moment with light, we become prayer. We become the answer to someone's deepest need." He turned to address the camera directly. "If you're watching this and you know someone who's hurting, don't wait. Don't worry about saying the right thing, or being funny enough, or perfect enough. Just show up. Be present. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply refuse to let someone suffer alone." The studio remained in reverent silence as Jimmy returned to his desk. But instead of continuing with the planned interview, he made another unprecedented decision. "You know what, Leanne? I think Miss Dorothy's story is the most important thing anyone could hear tonight. Would you tell us more about her? About your town? About the people who taught you that comedy is just love wearing a funny hat?" For the next 20 minutes, Leanne shared stories about her community, about the people who showed up for each other, about laughter as medicine, as prayer, as the thread that weaves broken hearts back together. The episode aired exactly as it happened, with no editing to remove the extended emotional moment. The response was unprecedented. Miss Dorothy began trending worldwide. Viewers shared their own stories of showing up for others, of using their gifts to heal, of becoming someone's prayer. The Tonight Show received thousands of letters from people inspired to visit sick friends, call estranged family members, or simply be more present in their communities. Comedy clubs across the country reported sold-out shows as people sought the healing power of laughter. But perhaps the most profound response came from Leanne herself. She established the Miss Dorothy Foundation, connecting comedians with hospice patients and nursing homes, understanding that sometimes the greatest gift isn't just making people laugh, it's helping them remember they're not alone. Jimmy kept his promise to stay in touch with Leanne. They became friends beyond the cameras, bonded by the understanding that their platforms weren't just about entertainment. They were about connection, healing, and the sacred responsibility of showing up for others. The empty chair that was kept in Miss Dorothy's living room after she passed became a symbol in their small Tennessee town, not of absence, but of presence, of the laughter that still echoed in those walls, of the prayer that was answered by a comedian with a guitar and a heart full of love. Years later, when asked about that night, Jimmy would say, "I learned something from Miss Dorothy and Leanne that changed how I approach every show. We're not just entertainers. We're temporary guardians of people's attention, their time, their hearts. And if we can use those moments to remind people that they matter, that they're not alone, that joy still exists, even in the darkness, then we're not just doing our jobs. We're doing God's work." Because sometimes when the world feels heavy and hope feels distant, laughter doesn't just become prayer. It becomes the answer to prayers we didn't even know we were praying. 3 months after that episode aired, Jimmy received an unexpected package at his office. Inside was a worn photo of Miss Dorothy, sitting in her living room chair, laughing at something off camera. On the back, someone had written in shaky handwriting, "This was taken during Leanne's last visit. Thought you should see what joy looks like. Dorothy's daughter, Sarah." Jimmy stared at that photo for a long time. Miss Dorothy's face was thin from illness, but her eyes sparkled with genuine delight. Her mouth was open mid-laugh, head tilted back slightly, hands clasped together in her lap. It was the face of someone who, despite everything, had found reason to smile. He called Leanne immediately. "You need to see this photo," he said when she answered. "I have it," she replied softly. "Sarah sent me one too. I keep it on my dressing room mirror at every show now, as a reminder." A reminder of what? That we're not just telling jokes, Jimmy. We're making memories. We're giving people moments they can carry with them when everything else falls apart. That photo became legendary in the Tonight Show offices. New staff members were shown Miss Dorothy's picture during orientation, not as entertainment, but as a reminder of what their work could mean to someone watching from a hospital bed, a nursing home, or just a living room where hope felt scarce. The ripple effects continued to spread. Comedy clubs began partnering with local hospitals. Comedians started visiting children's wards, not for publicity, but because they understood what Leanne had discovered. Sometimes the greatest performances happen for audiences of one. 6 months later, Jimmy flew to Tennessee to visit Miss Dorothy's hometown. He wanted to see the place that had shaped Leanne, the community that understood how to turn pain into purpose. The entire town turned out, not for celebrity worship, but to share their own stories of showing up for each other. Standing in Miss Dorothy's living room, now preserved exactly as it was during Leanne's visits, Jimmy felt the weight of what had happened there. The worn carpet where Leanne had performed, the chair where Miss Dorothy had laughed, the window where her daughter had watched hope return to her mother's eyes. She always said laughter was the closest thing to heaven she could imagine, Sarah told Jimmy as they stood together in that sacred space. When Leanne came, it was like watching Mama remember who she was underneath all the sickness. Jimmy knelt where Leanne had knelt, looked at the chair where Miss Dorothy had sat, and finally understood something he'd been chasing his entire career. Success wasn't measured in ratings or Emmy nominations. It was measured in moments like these, in the sacred exchange between performer and audience, when comedy becomes communion. On the flight home, Jimmy wrote in his journal, "Tonight I learned that every joke we tell, every laugh we create, every moment we help someone forget their troubles, it's all prayer. We're not just entertainers, we're healers who happen to use humor as our medicine." The Miss Dorothy Foundation grew beyond anyone's expectations. What started as a simple idea, connecting comedians with people who needed laughter, became a movement. Comedy became therapy. Performers became ministers. Stages became sanctuaries. But perhaps the most beautiful part of Miss Dorothy's legacy was what happened every Tuesday night on The Tonight Show. Jimmy began ending each episode the same way. "Remember, if someone in your life needs a laugh, a hug, or just someone to show up. Be their prayer, be their Leanne, be their reminder that even in the darkest moments, joy is still possible. And somewhere in Tennessee, in a small house where laughter once echoed off the walls, Miss Dorothy's empty chair serves as a reminder that love never really leaves. It just changes form, sometimes becoming a story, sometimes a memory, sometimes a late-night TV show that reminds millions of people that we're all capable of being someone's prayer. The night that laughter became prayer changed more than Jimmy Fallon's show. It changed the way America thought about comedy, community, and the sacred responsibility we all have to show up for each other when hope feels impossible to find. Because Miss Dorothy was right. When we use our gifts to heal others, when we refuse to let someone suffer alone, when we show up with light in the darkness, we don't just become comedians or hosts or performers. We become prayer. And Miss Dorothy, wherever she is probably still laughing.